Here is something the retirement industry does not want you to know. There are towns across the United States right now where $1,000 a month covers rent, groceries, healthcare, and still leaves money on the table. No, we are not talking about moving to a town where the only entertainment is watching the traffic light change. We ran the numbers using cost of living indexes, regional healthcare cost data, and local inflation trends. The result is a countdown of 10 places where you can actually retire in 2026 without a financial miracle. Some cities will surprise you. We start with number 10. Fort Payne sits at the edge of Lookout Mountain in northeast Alabama and has a population of 14,000. The cost of living here is 21% below the national average. Median rent for a two-bedroom is near $600 a month. Healthcare costs in the region are below the national average. Alabama does not tax Social Security income at the state level. Inflation has been lower here than in most Sunbelt cities. The trade-off is a slower lifestyle. Fort Payne delivers natural beauty and low overhead, with a cost structure that makes $1,000 a month feel like plenty. Would you trade city access for mountain views and a rent check that does not hurt? At number 9 is McAlester, Oklahoma. McAlester sits in southeastern Oklahoma with a population of around 18,000. Cost of living runs about 20% below the national average. A two-bedroom apartment rents for roughly $600 a month. Oklahoma does not tax Social Security benefits, and regional healthcare costs sit below the national median. Overall costs are low. Here is the inflation angle. Oklahoma's overall consumer price index has tracked lower than the national average for 3 consecutive years, meaning the gap between your fixed income and your actual expenses has been widening in your favor. The catch is Oklahoma weather, which operates on its own logic. Tornado season is real and summers are aggressive. But if climate is not your deal breaker, the financial numbers here are difficult to argue with. The data suggests that this is one of the most financially stable small retirement markets in the south-central United States. Wait until you see what's at number 6, a location where the golf is great. First, let us visit city number 8, Van Buren, Arkansas. Van Buren sits along the Arkansas River directly across from Fort Smith, giving you small town costs with immediate access to a larger city's healthcare network. The population is around 23,000. The cost of living runs 18% below the national average. Rent for a two-bedroom comes in near $700. Arkansas exempts Social Security income from state taxes entirely. What makes Van Buren notable from an inflation standpoint is its proximity to Fort Smith's healthcare infrastructure. Regional hospital costs in this corridor run below the national average, which matters when you are on a fixed income, and healthcare is your biggest variable expense. This is the Goldilocks option on the list. Not too remote, not too expensive, and close enough to real medical infrastructure that specialist access is not a half-day event. Coming in at number 7 is Mountain Home, Arkansas. Mountain Home is in the Ozarks, with a population of 12,000. The region is surrounded by beautiful lakes and is one of the most affordable retirement markets in the country. Cost of living sits 19% below the national average. Rent for a two-bedroom averages $700 per month. Arkansas's Social Security tax exemption applies here as well. Healthcare is a real asset. Baxter Regional Medical Center is local, which is rare for a town this size and this affordable. Regional healthcare inflation in the Ozarks corridor has stayed below the national average, meaning your out-of-pocket costs are rising more slowly than in most comparable markets. However, the isolation is real. You are an hour from anything resembling a city, but if your retirement plan centers on nature, low overhead, and financial stability, the numbers here are genuinely compelling. At number 6, we're back in Alabama, this time in the city of Dothan. This is the largest city on this list so far, with a population around 70,000. It calls itself the peanut capital of the world, which tells you everything about the pace of life here. Costs here are affordable. Cost of living runs 17% below the national average. Rent for a 2-bedroom is $800 a month. Alabama's Social Security exemption applies here too. Healthcare is a legitimate strength. There are 2 major hospital systems, which helps keep costs more in check than in rural markets with only a single hospital. Regional healthcare cost averages are below the national median for common outpatient procedures. Costs have remained level over the past 3 years, while comparable Sunbelt cities have seen cost of living creep upward. That stability is the real selling point here. It is not just cheap today, the data suggests it will stay affordable. Before we get to number 5, stay tuned for an Arizona city famous for being the astronomy capital of America. At number 5 is Punta Gorda, Florida. Punta Gorda sits on Charlotte Harbor in southwest Florida. With a population around 20,000, cost of living runs 12% below the Florida state average and sits near the national average overall. Rent for a 2-bedroom lands at approximately $1,000 a month, which is the highest on this list so far. But Florida has no state income tax and no Social Security tax, which changes the math significantly. Healthcare costs in Charlotte County track below the Miami and Tampa metro averages by a meaningful margin. That gap matters when you are budgeting on a fixed income. Regional inflation here has been lower than in Orlando and South Florida corridors over the past 2 years. The trade-off is hurricane risk. You need to budget for insurance. If Florida is where you want to be, the numbers say Punta Gorda is where you can actually afford to stay. Number 4. Tucson, Arizona, is known for astronomy. Tucson is where most analysts stop expecting affordability from a Sunbelt city. Population is 550,000, which makes it the largest market on this list so far. Cost of living runs about 8% below the national average. Rent for a 2-bedroom averages around $1,000. Arizona does not tax Social Security income, and Tucson's healthcare infrastructure is substantial. This is anchored by a major university medical system with outstanding specialists. Tucson's rent inflation over the past 3 years has run significantly below Phoenix, Scottsdale, and most comparable Western metros. While those markets surged, Tucson stayed relatively stable. The nightly light show is perfect for astronomy buffs. For a retiree who wants a big city, strong healthcare options, and a warm climate without paying Phoenix prices, Tucson is the analytical choice. The size surprises people. The affordability surprises them more. Stay tuned for a California city that statistically should not be on this list, but is. And the city at number 1 will surprise you. Number 3 is Brownsville, Texas. Brownsville sits at the southern tip of Texas on the Mexican border, with a population of around 185,000 people. Cost of living is 23% below the national average, creating a low-cost environment. Rent for a 2-bedroom comes in at $800. Texas has no state income tax and no Social Security tax. The proximity to Mexico also means prescription costs and dental work are often done across the border at a fraction of the price. Healthcare costs run below the national average, and regional inflation has been lower than the Texas state average for 3 consecutive years. That combination of low baseline costs and slower inflation growth is exactly what a fixed income needs to stay solvent long term. The heat is real, and it is one important trade-off to consider. When weighing cost of living, healthcare, and inflation trajectory, Brownsville remains one of the strongest performers on this list. At number 2, we have Fresno, California. Fresno is the entry that stops people mid-scroll. California and rent at $1,000 a month. Those 2 things do not belong in the same sentence for most people, but the data says otherwise. Cost of living in Fresno runs 20% below the California state average and sits near the national average overall. Rent for a 2-bedroom averages around $1,000. Fresno's regional healthcare costs are well below Southern California and the Bay Area. The inflation picture is what makes Fresno genuinely interesting. Fresno's rent growth has been moderate. The gap between Fresno and San Francisco on a per-dollar basis for retirement viability is not even close. If California is where your family is, where your doctors are, or simply where you want to be, Fresno is the answer to how you actually make that work on a fixed income. The champion of this list at number 1 is Dorado, Puerto Rico. Dorado sits on Puerto Rico's northern coast with a population of around 40,000, and it carries a reputation for resort living. This makes the affordability data genuinely surprising. Cost of living runs nearly 20% below the United States average. Rent for a 2-bedroom typically lands between $600 and $800. As a United States territory, Puerto Rico requires no passport or visa and no immigration complexity for American citizens. Social Security applies, and so does Medicare. Federal benefits transfer to residents. The Metro Hospital Network gives you specialist access that most small markets on this list simply cannot offer. Regional healthcare costs are much less than mainland medians. Puerto Rico also carries no federal income tax on locally sourced income for residents, and property tax rates are among the lowest of any United States jurisdiction. If $1,000 a month sounds impossible where you are right now, look no further than this list. Subscribe for more state and territory level breakdowns, and let me know in the comments which of these 10 surprised you the most.